greater freedom than at any time during the pandemic so far. Thanks to the rapid progress of our vaccination programme, our investment in treatments, and our decision to open up during the warmer summer months, we're in a far stronger position than we were last winter. But even as I stood at the dispatch box back in July, when I stood here to announce the major milestone of taking step 4 in our roadmap, I said, and I quote, Madam Deputy Speaker, "We know that the greatest risk to the progress that we've made is the possibility of another new variant, especially one that can escape immunity and puncture the protective wall of our vaccination programme. We've always known that variants have had the potential to knock us off our course, and we've built the capacity to identify and to respond to those that pose a threat. The vast majority of new variants present no risk whatsoever. Since the summer, there have been hundreds of new variants, but only one of them, Omicron, has been designated a variant of concern. For example, just last month, I updated the House from this dispatch box on AY 4.2, a new form of the Delta variant, which preliminary analysis showed at that time might be more infectious. I said then that we would keep it under review, and that's what we decided, and that's what we did, and we took no action. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, Omicron is a grave threat. We acted early to slow its spread, strengthening our testing regime and placing 11 countries on the travel red list. But despite those swift steps, the data over the past few days has shown more cause for concern. And I'd like to reinforce with the House today, to all honourable members, why Omicron represents such a risk to the progress that we've all made so far together. I will, yes.
I'm grateful. I'm listening very carefully to the Secretary of State's comments and the fact that he's brought these measures to the House. I asked him yesterday whether, if the government had to bring further measures in, other than those being proposed today, during the recess, whether he would give a commitment at the dispatch box to recall the House so that we could be involved on behalf of our constituents in making that decision. He very kindly agreed to take that matter away to discuss it with the Prime Minister. Is he able now at dispatch box to commit that if the government were to take further measures to deal with Omicron during the recess, that the government would recall the House of Commons so that we're able to have all of the evidence and participate in taking those decisions on behalf of the constituents we represent?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I of course understand the importance of the question from my right honourable friend, and as he said himself, he asked it yesterday and he understandably asked it again today. I hope he understands I am not able to give that commitment alone. It wouldn't be a decision for me and my department alone, but it is something that I know the government would consider together seriously. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to... I will, yeah.
Very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. I wonder whether he might consider going a little bit further, because since the data is changing all the time, almost by the minute, it's inconceivable that in a week's time and a week after that we'll be in the same place that we are today. This House needs to consider the information available to it in near real time, and therefore will he go away and consider whether it would be appropriate now to ensure that the House is able to consider these matters for sure next week and the week after that?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I will consider that, but it is important. Of course, this is, my honourable friend is right to point out this is a fast-moving situation, and it is right that the government continues to monitor that and respond to that when necessary. But I hope that my honourable friend will agree with me that right here and now, the matter that's being debated in the regulations in front of the House, this is the best possible response that can be given by this Parliament today. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will. Then I need to make some progress. I will.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. If he is going to consider these matters, will he also include consideration of the issue that obviously the virus spreads if people are not able to isolate? So will he think about addressing the issue of statutory sick pay, spreading the scope of SSP and lifting it to a proper rate so people can isolate, not spread the virus and not end up in our hospitals.
I understand, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the honourable gentleman will know already. Currently, there are some measures in place, such as the ability to get sick pay from day one. There are hardship funds, but I understand what the honourable gentleman has said. He's asked us to look at that further, and we will. All these matters are under review. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do want to turn to some of the information that... No, I will have to... I'll take an intervention later for the honourable gentleman. But some of the things that we have learnt about this new variant. And the first thing is, and these are things that we know certainly it is a fast-moving situation. In the last week, we have been able to determine these things with a high degree of confidence. First, that it is more transmissible. Omicron is more transmissible than the Delta variant. We can see that the growth in Omicron cases here in the UK is now mirroring the rapid increase that we are seeing in South Africa, and the current observed doubling time is around every 2 days. Although yesterday we reported there were 4,713 confirmed cases of Omicron in the UK, the UK HSA estimate that for the number of daily infections was 42 times higher at 200,000. Scientists have never seen a COVID-19 variant that's capable of spreading so rapidly. So we have to look at what we can do to slow Omicron's advance. So I will, to the honourable lady there, then I will. Yeah.
I'm grateful to him for giving way, and he's making a strong point about exactly why we need to do far more to address the threat of Omicron. But does he accept that the government's mixed messaging has been incredibly unhelpful, telling people that a tsunami of Omicron is on the way, but at the same time we can go on partying? Absolutely undermines that message. Will he have the moral courage to say that we actually do need to reduce our social contacts, and will he make it possible for people to do that, both with the sick pay we've already talked about and with ensuring that businesses get the financial support they need if fewer people are going into those business premises?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think what we need to do are the measures that are in front of the House today, and I hope the House will support those. I think those are the most important measures that we can take right now. I will give way to my honourable friend.
Secretary of State for giving way. But has he heard the statement or seen the statement from Angelique Katese, the head of the South African Medical Board today, who says that the government's measures on lockdown may be counterproductive, that Omicron is a mild form of COVID-19. It will have huge benefits for herd immunity and protection, and delaying its spread may give time for a more virulent and pathogenic variant to take hold and cause more deaths in the UK.
Madam Speaker, first of all, I think my honourable friend, if I heard him correctly, talked about the government's measures on lockdown. I'm not sure where he's seen these measures on lockdown, because they're certainly not here today being presented by this government. On the issue of whether this is milder or not, I will come to that very shortly. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend, actually building on the point from my honourable friend from North West Leicestershire, and hearing my honourable friend saying he's just about to expand. But the question is this: when would we know whether Omicron gives severe or mild disease? And therefore, if it is mild, how quickly would the decision to be made that this would be of an advantage to get rid of Delta and get a herd immunity which doesn't create strong disease?
Madam Speaker, if my honourable friend will allow me, I'm about to come precisely to the point that he raises. So the second thing about Omicron that I want to share is that although we don't yet have a complete picture of Omicron's severity, even if severity is significantly lower, then the much higher transmissibility of Omicron means it still has the potential to overwhelm the NHS. Take the current observed doubling time of 2 years. And let's say, just for argument's sake, let's take the current doubling time of 2 days. Right? And let's say, just for argument's sake, if I say to honourable members, for argument's sake, that Omicron was only half as severe as Delta, half as severe. After the lag between cases and hospitalizations has taken effect, then this would mean it would only buy you 2 days. It would buy you 2 days before Omicron hospitalizations reached the same level as Delta. In England, I will later. In England, 10 people are confirmed to have been hospitalised with the Omicron variant. Now, and I know that some honourable members, they have said that because confirmed hospitalisations from Omicron are low, then we don't need to act. But it's the fact that Omicron hospitalisations are low that means it is now the best time to act. And we've seen during previous waves, we've already seen this, the lag between infections and hospitalisations, it's about 2 weeks. When infections are rising so quickly, we're likely to see a substantial rise in hospitalisations before any measure is starting to have an impact. So there really is no time to lose. I will give way.
I thank my friend for giving way, and I understand the nuanced point that he's making. But just on forecasts, will he accept that many academics have doubted the previous forecast, describing them as hysterical, substantially inflated, consistently overconfident, lurid and severely flawed? We have had a problem with inaccurate forecasts. Would he accept that point?
Yes, I absolutely accept that point. And with previous variants of COVID, we have seen forecasts and estimates, whether it's from academics or think tanks and others, that have been completely off the mark. But all I would just say gently to my honourable friend and other honourable members, just because forecasts in the past have been wrong, it doesn't mean to say every estimate or forecast is always wrong. And I hope my honourable friend will note that. I will give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. He talks about hospitalisations and the danger that they may cause to the NHS. But will he reflect on the fact that it's not just hospitalisations, but it's the length of stay in hospitals that determines how many beds are occupied? And evidence from South Africa suggests not only are there fewer hospitalisations, but people are in hospital for a much shorter time. Is that reflected in his calculations?
Yes, sir. I could confirm that to my right honourable friend. First of all, he's absolutely right to make that point. Of course, it's not just about entering hospital, but it's about how many days that individual is likely to stay in hospital. And currently, with the Delta variant, I believe it's roughly about 9 days an individual on average stays in hospital. And if that was cut, for example, to 5 or 6 days, of course that would help with capacity. Now, first of all, we can't assume that, because what we are seeing in terms of the hospitalisation, the impact in South Africa, or the hospitalisations there are rising rapidly. There are hundreds of people on ICU and ventilators, that it's hard to read across, given that the average age of the South African population, I believe, is about 27 years, for example. So it's hard to just completely read that across. But I hope he would agree with me, similar to the point I just made on severity, that even if the hospital stay is half of what it is at the moment, at the rate that this thing is growing, and if it continues to grow at that rate, that could be cancelled out, that benefit could be cancelled out in 2 days. I give way to the honourable gentleman. Yep.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. He's facing a lot of criticism from behind him, but he should be assured that on these benches we absolutely recognise the dangers of the variant in front of him. But does he accept that, having come into his post saying that the end of restrictions was irreversible, that he has created an expectation that he's going to constantly ignore the scientific advice, which is why he's facing so much disappointment behind him now?
Now, I think the honourable gentleman may have heard earlier when I started my remarks, I talked about what I said at this dispatch box in July, specifically about the risk of a vaccine escape variant. Now, I do want to talk about the vaccines and this variant, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will give way one more time for now to my honourable friend, and then I will come back to other honourable friends.
I'm very grateful, and I think my views on this are pretty well understood. Just given the case that he's setting out, I think one thing I'm puzzled by is why he's only going as far as he is. Can he just explain to us why, in his estimation, the measures he's taking are equal to the situation which he's describing?
Madam Deputy, it's a very fair question, as always, from my honourable friend. The measures that we are setting out, we are taking into account the very best advice that we are being given. including making sure that we're not just listening to every piece of advice or every forecast that we're seeing. My honourable friend will remember back in the summer, if we had listened to some of the advice we were receiving, we wouldn't have opened up in the way that we did. So we are taking account of the advice, deciding on whether it should influence our decision-making, and then coming to a balanced and proportionate response, which are the measures that I've talked of, I will talk about here today, but also, for example, increasing the booster programme, which I will turn to in a moment too. Now, I must make some progress. Madam Deputy Speaker, but I will come back to honourable members in a moment and take further interventions. I do want to talk about the importance of what we learnt about Omicron and the vaccines. Vaccines have proven to be highly effective against previous variants, for example, the Alpha and Delta variants. This has weakened the link between cases and hospitalisations and deaths, and it has allowed us to reopen our country once more. But recent analysis from the UK HSA has shown that 2 doses of a vaccine provide much lower levels of protection against symptomatic infection from Omicron when compared to the Delta variant. But, more encouragingly, effectiveness rose considerably in the early period after a booster dose, providing around 70 to 75% protection against symptomatic infection. This data starkly shows the importance of booster doses and why we're working so hard to get many more boosters into arms, and I will say more about that in just a moment. Now, our strategy is to take proportionate action now, to come down hard on this virus and strengthen our defences rather than waiting until it's too late. I will to my honourable friend. Yeah.
The whole point is that we cannot be complacent about assuming that this likely huge increase in infections is all going to have very mild symptoms. And therefore what the government is doing is taking modest steps to ensure that if that doesn't happen, we will be prepared. And will he promise that actually if that doesn't materialise, then he will be able to relax again?
Madam Deputy, we all want to relax, and I wish I was more relaxed right now than I already am. But my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I agree with her. I'll give way to the honourable lady.
I'm really grateful. I appreciate that this is an escalating situation which needs urgent attention. But the reality is, if we are enabling social mixing, that is the very place where we are going to see transmission, as we did with Delta last December. So will he review these measures? Because it seems that these statutory instruments before us today are already out of date.
It is important, of course, that we keep measures under review, but I do believe, for the reasons I've said earlier, and I will continue to set out, these set of measures before the House, they are the right balance and proportionate response. Yes, I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He may be interested to learn that Dr Coetzee gave evidence to the Science and Technology Committee this morning, and rather contra to her piece in the Mail, she actually endorsed what the government is doing. She said that the boosters were definitely the absolute priority, but she said face masks and avoiding mixing, and she was asked specifically about the COVID proposals. She said they sounded like a proportionate response to the requirements of the situation.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for sharing that with the House, and I think it's important to hear that support from South African experts too. I will give my
friends for giving way. We are, of course, all concerned, I think, to hear that Plan C measures are being discussed already. I'd be grateful if you could lay that to rest. But could I take into the question of hospitalisations? There's a difference between people who've been hospitalised with Omicron and from Omicron. So could he tell us what he knows about those cases, how many came to hospital for other reasons, and how many have actually arrived in hospital because they are seriously ill with Omicron?
Well, what I can tell my right honourable friend is that there are approximately, in English hospitals, about 6,000 people with COVID, as they're positive COVID cases. Of those, around, as I've shared this information with the House before, because I was determined to get this information when I first became Health Secretary, of those, approximately 80% are there because of the symptoms they have from COVID, and around the rest, about 1/5, are there because for other reasons, and they also, of course, have been tested for COVID, and they happen to have COVID. I hope that is helpful for my right honourable friend. I will give way one more time for now, and then I will...
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. I really must press him on this issue on behalf of workers in my constituency across the country, particularly low-paid workers. Why isn't the government bringing a vote today on whether to increase sick pay to real living wage levels? We can't have a situation where the government is making the case that this matter is so serious, which it is, yet forcing low-paid workers to choose between putting food on the table and self-isolating and protecting the rest of the community.
Where I agree with the honourable gentleman is about the importance of support for people with measures, and there is support already in place. I can see from the way he's raised this question that he thinks there should be more support. The honourable gentleman thinks that. I understand that we have a difference of view on that, but it is something that we keep under review. Now, when I set out our autumn and winter plan to this House in September, I outlined how we'd hold measures in reserve in case the NHS was likely to come under unsustainable pressure, and this would then stop it being able to provide treatment that we want all our constituents to receive. Yesterday, the NHS England announced that it will return to its highest level of emergency preparedness, level 4 national incident. And unfortunately, there is now a very real risk that the exponential rise of Omicron cases translates into a spike in hospital admissions and threatens to overwhelm the NHS. We've done so much already to boost the capacity of the NHS. We've increased the number of doctors by 5,000 over the past year and the number of nurses by almost 10,000. And we've also expanded the number of beds available. But we've also had to put in place measures for infection control which have limited this capacity. And there's already over 6,000 COVID-19 patients in hospital beds in England. Despite the progress that we've made, the NHS will never have unlimited numbers of beds, and nor unlimited numbers of people to look after anyone that is in those beds. So if we think that capacity risks being breached, then we simply have to step in. Because we know that what this would mean in practice for both COVID and for non-COVID care. It would mean one of your constituents, perhaps, is in a car crash. Maybe it's a child in a car crash. They need emergency care. And the NHS having to make difficult decisions about who deserves treatment and who doesn't. Now, I know that some honourable members think that this is merely hypothetical, but it's not. We've seen health services around the world become overwhelmed by COVID-19, and we cannot allow that to happen here. I'll give way to the honourable lady, and then I will. Yeah.
Thank him for giving way, and I'm extremely grateful for him mentioning frontline NHS staff. The All-Party Group on Coronavirus had a hearing this morning where we heard that they are suffering with moral injury because of the exact decisions that they have to make that he's just outlined. But the other thing we heard is that there is a worrying suggestion that Omicron may be worse for children than Delta. What assessment has he made of that risk, and what is his plan for children to protect them against this deadly new wave?
Well, first of all, Madam Speaker, can I very much agree with the honourable lady about the work, everyone in the NHS, the phenomenal work they've been doing at all times, but especially over the last 2 years during this pandemic. They could not have delivered more. In terms of her question about children Omicron, I'm afraid we don't have any evidence of that yet that I have seen, but of course it's something, the impact of Omicron we take very, very seriously, that I hope that she can see, and we will keep that under review. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will take some interventions in a moment, but I do want to just finish this section. Madam Deputy Speaker, we're also giving the NHS more time to put boosters in arms, and I can assure the House that we won't waste a single second in doing that. We've already given more booster doses than anywhere else in Europe, and 44% of the people in this country over the age of 18 have already been boosted. But the recent data showing the importance of booster doses for our fight against Omicron has highlighted the need to go even faster. Yesterday, I set out to the House how we're bringing the target we've set ourselves, we're bringing it forward so that everyone who's eligible and aged 18 and over in England will be offered the chance to get their booster dose before the new year. This is a new national mission. a race between the virus and the vaccine to get as many people protected as soon as possible. And just as we embark on this huge logistical endeavour in the short term, we're also looking at the long term. We've already signed contracts to buy a total of 114 million extra doses of future-proof. These are future-proof vaccines that will help our country's vaccination programme over the next 2 years. And the deals that we've struck will give us the earliest access to modified vaccines to combat Omicron and future variants of concern, should we need them. I will. Yeah.
I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way, and he is absolutely right, and I'm overjoyed that the boosters are the key to getting the country out of this issue. I raised for the last couple of weeks and last week in PMQs the issue of the 15-minute wait post-Pfizer. I wonder if the MRHA or JCVI have come to a conclusion on this, because this will free up a huge amount of capacity when it comes to delivering the boosters.
Yeah, my honourable friend, as he mentioned, he did raise this yesterday, and what I can tell him that it is very urgently being looked at, and I am sure he will agree with me that if it is done, it should be done in a safe way that our regulators are happy with, and I can confidently say that I expect an urgent update later today as soon as I leave this chamber. I'll just get right to your honourable.
Most grateful to my right honourable friend, and I actually entirely agree with what he said about the pressure on the NHS and those difficult problems that will occur if there are injuries taken up by unvaccinated people blocking ICU beds. But, as my right friend said, variants come along. He's making the case that even if it's only got mild symptoms, you're going to get an exponential growth in hospitals. So what is the ongoing plan going forward? There's a set of measures today to deal with the situation now, fair enough. But if this is going to keep happening, how do we avoid being sat here in 3 months' time, 5 months' time, 6 months' time, debating the same thing? What's the plan?
It's a very fair question, and I will say more about that in a moment. But one of the things I've just mentioned, I point to my honourable friend, is the vaccines. Is the better and better vaccines in the future. We will have polyvalent vaccines, and because of the orders that we have already placed, we are the front of the queue for such vaccines. But I will to the honourable lady. I will come.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way on that point. Does he has he noticed, as I have, the view that Omicron and where it came from, it may have originated in Africa with an immunosuppressed sufferer from HIV, where these viruses can then mutate much faster than they would under other circumstances. And does he agree with me that the best way of dealing with this is to get vaccines into as many people in Africa as possible, and also ensure that HIV/AIDS sufferers are given access to the proper treatment?
Madam Speaker, there is lots of speculation on how Omicron may have originated. I won't add to that speculation now, but I will agree with the point, the general point the honourable lady has made, which I think is a very important and powerful one, about the need to get more vaccines to people in developing countries, whether that's in Africa, Asia or elsewhere. We can be proud of what the UK has already done. Over 20 million vaccines delivered through COVAX or directly, almost another 10 million on the way, and completely committed to meet our target of 100 million vaccine donations by June 2022.
Just before the Secretary of State makes further progress, it's absolutely right that the Secretary of State should be taking a lot of interventions. There are a lot of questions to be asked. People who've already made one intervention shouldn't be making a second intervention or a third intervention, and certainly not if they also wish to be called to speak later in the day. I've got too many people who wish to speak. There isn't going to be enough time for everybody, and be sure, if you keep intervening, you don't get to speak. Let's have a little consideration for others. Secretary of State.
I will indulge my honourable friend, the member for North West Leicester, but it's going to be really short.
The Secretary of State knows I've been short all my life. The Secretary of State said earlier in his opening speech that the average age in South Africa was 27.5. I fear he may have misspoken or be badly advised. In fact, the median age in South Africa is 27.5, and the comparative median age in the UK is 40.5. Not radically different.
Well, first of all, I think I'm pleased I allowed that intervention. I'm pleased I allowed it because I don't want people to think, like my honourable friend has just been suggested, but I do have to disagree, though. I think, first of all, there's a big difference between those two ages. And last time I looked, the median can be described as an average. But I'm pleased they shared that because it highlights my point. Now, I do need to plough on that, but I will take some interventions a bit later. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the reasons I've set out, I do believe the responsible decision to take is because of all this, is to move to Plan B in England, drawing on the measures that we've held in contingency to give more time to get those boosters into arms. These are not steps that we would take lightly. I firmly believe in individual liberty and that the curbs should be placed on our freedoms only in the most gravest of circumstances. And not only that, I am of course mindful of the cost that restrictions can bring to the nation's health, to our education, to the economy. So it's vital that we act early and we act in a proportionate way, doing whatever we can to build our defences and to preserve greater freedom for the long term. I'm confident that these measures are balanced and they're proportionate measures, and that they still leave us with far fewer restrictions that are in place in most countries in Europe. And I can assure the House that we'll keep reviewing these measures that we've put in place, and we won't keep them in place for a day longer than we have to. I will give way.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way, specifically on the regulations. Given the regulation about refusal of entry, given the small number of venues and the large number of exemptions, and we know the lack of protection for doubly vaccinated people, why is there not the necessity for everybody to show a lateral flow test rather than showing double vaccination?
If my honourable friend allows me, I will come to that point shortly. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I just said a moment earlier that we won't keep measures in place for a moment longer than we need to. And for example, now that there is community transmission of Omicron in the UK, and Omicron has spread so widely across the world, the travel red list is now less effective in slowing the incursion of Omicron from abroad. So I can announce today that whilst we'll maintain our temporary testing measures for international travel, we will be removing all 11 countries from the travel red list effective from 4 a.m. tomorrow morning. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to turn to the details of some of these regulations before the House. Regulation number 1400 proposes extending the use of face coverings. In October, UKHSA published an updated review of the evidence on the effectiveness of face coverings and concluded that there's good evidence that they can help in reduce the spread of COVID-19 when worn in the community. This regulation proposes extending the legal requirement to most indoor settings, including theatres and cinemas, although they're not required in places where it wouldn't be practical. So, for example, hospitality settings like cafes and restaurants and pubs, nightclubs or other dance venues, or in exercise facilities like gyms. Next, Madam Deputy Speaker, Regulation 1416. This would mean anyone over 18 would need to show a negative lateral flow test to get into a limited number of higher-risk settings unless they were double vaccinated. However, as I announced to the House yesterday, in light of the new data on how vaccines respond to Omicron, our intention is that boosters will be required instead of 2 doses as soon as all adults have had a reasonable chance to get their booster jab. I will.
I thank the Secretary of State for being so generous with these interventions. Would the Secretary of State agree that if we are to go on the front foot in tackling this pandemic, we have to acknowledge that this pandemic is like our house being on fire, and we're dealing with just one room in that house when the rest of the house is on fire? Surely the TRIPS waiver, giving those other countries across the developing world and beyond the ability to produce the vaccine themselves and increase supply at a cost-effective rate and stopping Big Pharma from excessively profiteering, is the way that we get onto our front foot in vaccinating the rest of the world to enable that new variants do not continue to flourish.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said in response to a question from another honourable member earlier, we are, in terms of getting vaccines to developing world, donations through COVAX, bilateral, are really important. But I have to strongly disagree with the suggestion of the honourable member that waiving rights to intellectual property and patent are going to help. They are not going to help. It is going to undermine the world's ability to deal with this pandemic, because it will remove all the incentives from the pharmaceutical companies to actually develop these valuable drugs in the first place. I do have to respectfully disagree with the honourable gentleman. Now, I do need to make some progress. Madam Deputy Speaker, with this, however, I announced to the House yesterday, in light of this new data on how vaccines respond to Omicron, our intention is that boosters will be required instead of 2 doses, as soon as all adults have had a reasonable chance to get their booster jab. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to reinforce to honourable members that this proposal around getting a lateral flow test, a negative result from a lateral flow test, or not having to do so if you are double vaccinated, this is not a vaccine passport. It's really important to me, as a point of principle, that people have a range of different routes to show how they're eligible. And that is what it is before the House today. These options include showing proof of a negative test for the last 48 hours, proof of vaccination, a medical examination, or evidence of participation in a clinical trial. These regulations cover a small number of settings that present particular risk. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank the honourable friend for giving way, and he knows that I'm completely against vaccine passports and mandatory vaccinations. Can he confirm with me, though, that lateral flow tests will always be used, and allay fears that people have in Rother Valley and myself, that we are not going to create a 2-tier system, we're not going to have mandatory passports, and lateral flow tests will always be used so everyone can have access to all parts of our society?
I can give my honourable friend that confirmation. I'm very happy to make that really clear. I think it is absolutely vital. There's always an option for lateral flow tests, and I would not support a vaccine-only option. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. In terms of providing proof of negative lateral flow test, is that possible for someone who doesn't have access to the internet or phone? What's the evidentiary requirement?
The lateral flow tests are available for everyone. The vast majority of people, I think, will have access to phones or in other ways. And we are looking at, and many people we have seen have, they can, once they have taken the lateral flow test and registered that result, perhaps with the help of someone else in their family or a friend, they are able also to get printed proof of that by using the 119 service. And if there are other ways to improve that, of course, we will. But it is something that we have found is available to the vast majority of people, including to those who might not be so familiar with technology. I will give way.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. Can I say to him that a vaccine passport with a lateral flow test alternative is still a vaccine passport? We have seen the use of vaccine passports in other parts of the country, in Scotland and in Wales. So can he tell the House what difference it has made to the transmission of Omicron in these parts of the country?
Well, I'm coming to that more specifically in a moment. But again, I just have to... This is not a vaccine passport. I mean, the right honourable gentleman should know that a vaccine, if he wants to see a vaccine passport, you know, he will know of that in Scotland, or he can go to France or some other countries. But this is a requirement. It is, of course, an attempt to reduce the risks in a high-risk venue from high-risk from COVID, and I think it is a sensible and proportionate way that provides a number of options and a number of flexibilities in doing so. I do have to make some progress, and I will take some interventions later. These regulations 1,416, they cover a small number of settings that present a particular risk. Venues like nightclubs, indoor events with over 500 or more attendees likely to stand and move around, outdoor events with 4,000 or more attendees likely to stand and move around, and all events with 10,000 or more attendees. These measures come into force tomorrow. We've given a week's notice of these changes, so I will in a moment. So we've given notice of these changes so venues have time to put arrangements in place, and I'm pleased to see that many venues are already using these measures. We can't, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, we can't eliminate the risk of COVID-19. That's, of course, simply not possible, nor should that be tried. But we can reduce it, and these proposals offer a pragmatic way of doing this. Under these proposals, people can either show a negative lateral flow test result, meaning that they're less likely to be infectious than otherwise, or they can be double jabbed, which means that they'll be less likely to become severely unwell if they are exposed to COVID-19. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. Many of my constituents have contacted me concerned that these measures today are the first step in further restrictions against social gatherings and businesses. Will he assure them today that this is not the case and that if we can rescind these measures earlier than the 26th of January, we will?
What I'm about to say next, I think, will give my honourable friend that assurance that these plans would make high-risk environments safer than they would otherwise be. But this regulation, this particular regulation, in fact, all these regulations, the measures on face coverings, they will be reviewed by the 5th of January, and they will all sunset on the 26th of January. That's the point I think I would emphasise in response to my honourable friend's question. They would sunset on the 26th of January, and even if the government wanted to do something different and change this some way, of course it would have to come back to this House and seek the House's approval. I will give way.
He's quite right that these are not vaccine passports. His backbenchers and the Liberal Democrats are completely wrong about that. But can I warmly welcome what he said a moment or two ago about abolishing the red list? Will he now release all of those people who are currently incarcerated in so-called quarantine hotels in inhumane conditions in this country now? And will he also get rid of the other extra restrictions he introduced only 2 weeks ago to try to keep the Omicron variant out when it's already here?
Madam Speaker, it's an important point about the managed quarantine. Those people are already in managed quarantine. I'm told that the practice in the past on this has been requiring them to complete their quarantine period. However, I do understand the importance of that, and I have asked for urgent advice about what this means, and I hope to act very quickly on just that. I will give way to the honourable.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. One of the things that we do know about Omicron is the significant genetic mutations and changes that have happened to the spike protein. And this morning at the Science and Technology Committee, Kate Bingham, the government's own vaccine czar, said that the government's decision to pull the plug on Valneva contract was mistaken. Will the Secretary of State make a commitment today to revisit that, given the specific technologies that exist there with the whole virus vaccine that is described by Ms Bingham as having the edge over other vaccines and would help the distribution of vaccines to the rest of the world?
I think the honourable gentleman will understand that when the government makes decisions on vaccines, it takes expert advice. Most of that comes from the JCVI, and we always listen carefully to that advice and make a final decision. But though that advice is coming on a number of occasions and is constantly kept under review. Now, yes, I will. Yeah.
Thank you very much to my honourable friend for giving way. I'm referring back to the honourable member on the opposite side from Exeter's point. It surely is crazy that people who have been in self-isolation are going to have to remain there. The 11 countries haven't been removed from the red list. But surely not only should they be released from their incarceration, but they also should be reimbursed for the astronomical amount of fees they've had to pay.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I very much understand what my honourable friend has said. I'm very persuaded by what he said. I would love to stand here right now and just say that is the case. There are some issues that need to be resolved, and they are urgently being looked at. And I hope we can say something more on this as a government, even as early as today. But I do understand what he said for exactly the reasons that he said, including on his point about reimbursement as well. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, As well as the new measures we're proposing, we're also restoring freedoms too, drawing on the defences that we've already built. At the end of last month, this House passed regulations requiring all close contacts of a suspected or confirmed Omicron case to self-isolate for 10 days. But given the increasing dominance of Omicron, this approach no longer makes sense for public health purposes, and nor is it sustainable for the economy. So we're drawing on the testing capacity that we've built to create a new system of daily testing for COVID contacts, which has started today. Instead of close contacts of confirmed cases or suspected cases having to self-isolate, all vaccinated contacts, irrespective of whether the contact was with an Omicron case or not, will be asked to take lateral flow tests every day for 7 days. Regulation 1415 allows us to put this plan into action by revoking the Omicron-specific provisions for self-isolation. Yeah, I will.
I thank him. He knows I welcome that. I think the isolation regs that we passed 2 weeks ago, which I didn't support, was sinister, and well done for getting rid of it. The test and release, though, he will know many of our constituents, many of mine have contacted me to say they cannot, for love nor money, get hold of lateral flow tests right now. Could he update the House on whether this problem has been resolved?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend will understand that there has been a huge surge in demand for lateral flow tests, perfectly, of course, understandably. And the situation at present is that the warehouses of the UK HSA, they have plenty of stock. The distribution channel has been limited, although they have added to that significantly in recent days, including building on the channels they had with Royal Mail, with Amazon and other suppliers, and also opening up more access points other than direct ordering online, so that people can pick up tests, for example, from far more pharmacies than they currently can do. But it is something that is being worked on, and I think whatever the current situation is, it will improve very, very quickly. I hope that reassures my honourable friend. I will take one more until I need to start closing.
I thank the Secretary of State, and he's making some vital points about testing and self-isolation, but I did raise a point with him yesterday about PCR testing, and I'd like to come back to it, because although the supply of lateral flow tests is important, so is the PCR testing, which is obviously more reliable, gold standard. Today there was a point when it was reported on social media that there were no PCR testing slots available in any region of England. Yesterday I asked the Secretary of State if he would authorise each Director of Public Health across the country to have a float stock of 500 PCR tests they can use to disrupt COVID outbreaks and to slow the transmission of Omicron. I think that's a really important point. Only 9 of the Directors of Public Health have that float stock at the moment. Will he take that vital step and authorise it for all the other Directors of Public Health?
We are, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are working very closely, as the Honourable Lady would imagine, with Directors of Public Health throughout England, whether it's on testing and elsewhere. In terms of testing, PCR, specific testing capacity, there's around, I think capacity is around roughly 600,000 a day. It's been expanded to, it normally is at that level, it's been expanded already to around 800,000 a day. It will be further expanded. I think it is important for Honourable Members to know that testing is released during the different times of the day, and so if someone checks the system and it's not available, it might be available in their local area in the next couple of hours. It's not just a day-by-day process, and also as it is surged, they will become much more easily available. But it is important, I think, to remind people whenever one can that PCR tests should only be used if someone has symptoms. Otherwise, lateral flow tests are the tests that should be deployed. Now, finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to turn to measures to help keep the health and care system safe for the long term by making vaccination a condition of deployment for more health and social care settings. Across the UK, the overwhelming majority of us have made the positive choice to accept the offer of a vaccination against COVID-19. And 91% of NHS staff already have 2 doses. But we need this figure to go even higher. Uptake rates vary between different health and care organisations and across the country. And despite the incredible effort to boost uptake across the country, there are still approximately 94,000 NHS staff who are unvaccinated. It's critical to patient safety that health and care staff get the jab, to protect some of the most vulnerable people who are in their care, and also keep the NHS workforce strong in the wake of Omicron. Now, we made vaccination against COVID-19 a condition of deployment in care homes from the 11th of November this year. And contrary to what some feared, we're not aware of any care home closures where vaccination as a condition of deployment has been the primary cause. Today, we're putting before the House regulations to extend this requirement to health and other social care settings. I will give way to the honourable gentleman. And then I'll
thank the Minister for giving way. Earlier on in his speech, the Minister pointed out that the capacity of the health service is important and should not be breached. How does he expect, if there's 9% of the staff who have to this date decided not to be vaccinated and who presumably will stick with that decision, how does he expect that that will not reduce the capacity of the health service in the future? And is it not a fact that already there are many people who are staying in hospital because it can't be facilitated in care homes due to the lack of staff?
It's a fair question, and I will be answering precisely that question in just a moment. I'll turn to my right on friend.
With direct reference to what he's just been talking about, we know that the vaccines are only 33% effective at reducing infection of Omicron. We know that the reduction of infectiousness reduces dramatically to 0 after 12 weeks in the case of AstraZeneca. So what does he view as better in terms of protecting people from infection? Daily lateral flow tests or vaccination?
I think I'd say to my honourable friend, I think that they both have a role to play. Of course, in the NHS and in social care, there is very frequent testing, both lateral flow testing, in the case of the NHS, often PCR testing. But I think vaccination has a role to play. At this point in time, many people still have 2 doses. That is rapidly changing. When they have 3 doses, get their booster doses, that gives them an even higher degree of protection. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and I draw attention to my register of members' interests. I think the Minister is making a very clear argument for the need to do something. He talks about how a very small proportion of a much larger number of cases could overwhelm the NHS in the way that a larger proportion of a much smaller number of cases might not. But we do know that the NHS has a huge backlog of people awaiting diagnostic and operative procedures. I'd like to ask him what evidence he has that mandating vaccines for NHS staff will help. And given the fact that we know that vaccination doesn't particularly reduce transmission, why he doesn't, and what he said before about the importance of choice, why he doesn't think it would be reasonable to offer medical staff and nursing staff the option of daily testing instead of vaccination, should they make that choice?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
These, in coming to this decision, we held an extensive consultation with thousands of responses. We also, of course, consulted, and this very importantly, with the NHS itself. As I shall touch on in a moment from now, the NHS itself has weighed up this decision, and the Honourable Lady is right if she suggests that there may be some people that choose to leave the NHS rather than stay and be vaccinated. That is a choice for them to make. But there's also here an issue of patient safety. That is also the view of the NHS. And as I said in response to my right honourable friend a moment ago, testing can be used as well alongside this, but vaccinations help as well. And I want to just talk about the settings.
Order. Let's allow the Secretary of State to finish his speech. He has some important information to put before the House. I now want to hear that. Secretary of State.
the workforce. We've just heard that, Madam Deputy Speaker, especially during these winter months, although even before the pandemic, workplace policies were in place requiring the hepatitis B vaccine for those who've had to perform certain clinical procedures. We're already allowing a 12-week grace period to give people the chance to make the positive choice to get protected, and we're aiming to start enforcing these requirements from the 1st of April next year, subject, of course, to the will of this House. And today, I will give way. If it's on this point, I will give way.
Very grateful to the Minister for giving way. If a member of the NHS decides they do not want to be vaccinated, will they be given a redundancy payment? And if not, why not? But if they are, and that is the policy, how much would it cost the NHS, and would that be a good use of taxpayers' money?
I believe it wouldn't be classed as redundancy, because it's not redundancy. You know, that job has not become redundant, and if that individual chooses not to get vaccinated, then that, of course, is a decision for them to make. But as I stressed, that the way that this will be implemented by the NHS and the way that it should be implemented by the NHS, and I know that there will be, is that getting vaccinated should always be a positive choice. And the NHS has put in place a number of methods and ways to try and provide the information that people want to share, and also including one-to-one consultations, providing more information, especially for those that may have received misinformation. And the outcome of this with the care homes, when this was the similar measure was implemented earlier, was that many of them, when they were provided with the right positive information, chose to actually become vaccinated rather than choose to leave the jobs. Now, I must make progress. I'm sorry, Madam.
Order. The Secretary of State is right. He must make progress. Other people need to speak now. Please, let us allow the Secretary of State to conclude his speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And just on this issue, to finish on this particular regulation, today the Chief Executive of NHS England has written to me reinforcing the importance of getting the jab in the interest of patient and staff safety, and I'll be placing a copy of this letter in the library of both houses today. And I'm pleased to say that despite the concerns that some people have raised, we've already seen a net increase of over 55,000 NHS staff vaccinated with the first dose since we consulted on the policy in September. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, although I firmly believe that these measures are a proportionate way of protecting those at greatest risk, I know that honourable members have questions about whether we would extend these measures further. And I'd like to say very clearly to the House today and say this once and for all, that although we've seen plans for universal mandatory vaccination in some countries in Europe, I will never support them in this country. I firmly believe that getting vaccinated is something that should be a positive decision, and I can assure the House that the government has no intention of extending the condition of deployment to any other workforces or introducing mandatory vaccination more widely. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the regulations we're debating today are not measures that any of us would like to be putting in place, but they are measures that I think the situation demands. Because when the facts change, our response must change too. As we look ahead to a winter with Omicron in the midst, the measures before the House today will fortify our national defences and guard the gains that we've all made against this deadly virus. I commend these regulations to the House.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order paper, and before I call the Shadow Secretary of State, it might be helpful for the House to know that there will be an immediate time limit of 5 minutes on backbench speeches that will reduce later in the afternoon, but initially 5 minutes. Shadow Secretary of State, Wes Streeting.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I begin by acknowledging that there are sincere and deeply held views on both sides of the debate that we're having this afternoon, indeed on both sides of the House, and I respect those taking a different view to the one that I'll be outlining on behalf of the opposition. But can I also say that we owe it to our country to give them a debate worthy of the finest traditions of this House. And in light of comments made in recent days by at least one Conservative MP comparing these measures to the situation in Germany in the 1930s, I would just say it should not be for me, as the Shadow Secretary of State, to point out that we are not living in the 1930s and the Secretary of State and his team are not Nazis. On their shoulders rests the health of our nation and the responsibility to protect our NHS. Indeed, it's a responsibility we all share. They need our support, and they are owed better treatment than they have received from some on their own side in recent days and even this afternoon. But no matter how dysfunctional the Conservative Party has become, the country can rely on Labour. We will act in the national interest, as we have done throughout the pandemic, putting public health before party politics by supporting the motions under consideration this afternoon. We do not do so lightly. Throughout the pandemic, we have asked the British people to make big sacrifices to support the national effort against coronavirus. Sacrifices which have impacted on lives, livelihoods and liberties. And whenever this House considers such measures, we owe it to the British people to explain why they are necessary. We believe these measures are necessary, a necessary response to the Omicron threat, necessary to protect ourselves, necessary to protect the ones we love, and necessary to protect our NHS. We can't yet be sure about the severity of the Omicron variant, but we can be certain that it is spreading and spreading fast, faster than any other variant. And even if a smaller proportion of Omicron victims are hospitalised, the rapid advance of the virus through the population could see large numbers of people admitted to hospital during the months in which the NHS is under greatest pressure. And there should be no complacency about this. The winter months present the greatest pressures on the NHS in any normal year. And as we know, this is far from a normal year. The NHS is contending with winter pressures, a serious backlog, the Delta variant, and now the Omicron variant. And when people invoke the story of the boy who cried wolf, the warnings that came before but never materialised, people should remember that in the end there was a wolf. Many of these challenges facing the NHS are understandable given the unprecedented challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. But we've got to be honest and acknowledge that confronting these challenges has been made much harder because we went into the pandemic with NHS waiting lists at a record 4.5 million, 100,000 staff vacancies and a shortage of 112,000 vacancies in social care. It wasn't just that they didn't fix the roof while the sun was shining, it's that they dismantled the roof and removed the floorboards. And now the NHS is locked in a race against time, a race against the fastest variant of COVID-19 we have seen to date, a race to get as many people boosted as possible before the end of this month. On this side of the House, we support them in that task. And let me say on behalf of all of us in the Labour Party, to every NHS worker, every GP, every pharmacist, every public health official in local government, every member of our armed forces and every volunteer stepping up to meet this enormous task, that we are with them 100%, and if anyone can do it, they can. I'll certainly give way.
Could you explain to me why the Labour Party supported not mandatory vaccinations for care workers, but now have changed their mind for NHS workers?
I'll outline our position on that, but the honourable gentleman will have to be patient, so I'll come on to that later in my speech. But we need to buy them some time. The measures put forward for consideration today are an attempt to do just that by slowing the spread of the virus whilst trying to protect Christmas so that people can enjoy the festive season safely. By limiting our interactions in the workplace, by wearing face coverings in settings where the virus finds it easiest to spread, by testing before we attend large indoor gatherings, and by getting behind the booster rollout to ensure that everyone is protected. I certainly will.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. And he's absolutely right that we're all very conscious of how important this time of year is to the hospitality sector. But would he agree with me the greatest threat to the hospitality sector isn't the kind of restrictions that are in front of us today, but it's the sense that this virus is out of control and widespread cancellations from the sector. So these restrictions in front of us today enable the hospitality sector to survive in this really difficult time, but also enable us to take proportionate steps to make sure the spike doesn't get out of control.
I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend. Indeed, one of the primary reasons for supporting measures for consideration today is because we on these benches support business, and we want to support them through a particularly difficult time when normally trading would be at its busiest. The goal in the end must, of course, be to learn to live with the virus. That means effective vaccination, antiviral treatments and public health measures that have minimal impact on our lives, our jobs and our businesses. So let me now take each of these measures in turn and explain why Labour supports them, and no doubt take interventions as we come to each one. Firstly, on mask wearing. Madam Deputy Speaker, no one enjoys wearing a mask. I certainly don't. But it is nothing compared with the cost that more draconian restrictions have on our lives, livelihoods and liberties. Masks are simply a price worth paying for our freedom to go out and live our lives during this pandemic. They are proven to be effective, and not only that, but in times of rising infections, when people are feeling increasingly cautious, it is vital to our economy that people feel safe boarding a busy bus or entering a crowded theatre. And in our view, the government should never have got rid of the requirement to wear masks in these settings. But we know why they did. And we've counted in recent weeks honourable members opposite not wearing masks. I'm glad to see that compliance has risen somewhat considerably. We know the Prime Minister no longer has the authority to lead his own party, but I'm grateful that members opposite have at least listened to their Health Secretary. Turning to the vaccine pass, onto testing to enter nightclubs and large events, I welcome that the government has listened to representations from Labour and responded. The Labour Party has argued consistently against vaccine passports and insisted on people having the option of showing a negative test. Further, we argue these passes should not be required for access to essential services. On both counts, the government has listened, amended the proposals, and we can support the measure in front of us today. It is not a vaccine passport. It is, in effect, a default requirement to show a negative test to enter venues where the virus is most likely to spread, with an opt-out available to those with an NHS COVID pass. I certainly will give way.
He's making a very good point on this. Is the reality not that if we didn't introduce these measures, there would be a danger that our nighttime economy, pubs, venues and other events would have to shut completely? Yeah. So this pass is actually a pass for freedom to allow us to continue to enjoy activities that otherwise would be shut down, and those libertarians opposite should be welcoming it, not bemoaning it.
I wholeheartedly agree with my honourable friend, and let me be clear, we in the Labour Party support this approach because we support British business. This is about giving people the confidence to go out and about despite the presence of Omicron. I certainly will give way.
I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for giving way. And I wonder if he shares my concern that reports over the past couple of days that there has been an absence or a lack of lateral flow devices to be sent out for testing. And also, what is also alarming is the lack of support for the domestic diagnostics market and the manufacture of lateral flow devices in this country that are much more accurate, reliable and superior to the current government lateral flow devices. And if these devices are to make a difference, then we must have the best quality devices in place.
Very good. I do agree with the honourable gentleman, and of course, in order for this measure to work as effectively as we would wish, there has to be an adequate supply of lateral flow tests. And I heard what the Secretary of State said yesterday about the availability of testing. But it's no good if the tests are in the warehouse. They need to be available to people where they need them, when they need them. We've had supply issues, and these really do need to be resolved, not least in light of other measures which I'll come on to shortly as well. I'll give way another time.
Shadow Minister for giving way. We do not accept that rather than giving confidence to people, these measures and the background against which they have been introduced have actually reduced confidence. When you have predictions of 75,000 deaths, when you are telling people that they can't go to venues unless they have certain tests, the experience in Northern Ireland already has been that the hospitality industry has lost millions of pounds of orders coming up to the Christmas period because people are afraid to go out.
Well, I'll say to the honourable gentleman, in dispatches from the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, where of course Northern Ireland is ahead of England on this, he had a perfectly nice time out last night, is my understanding, enjoying the best hospitality that Northern Ireland, the people of Northern Ireland have to offer. And I think people are drawing confidence from this. And let me also say, drawing on the experience of other countries, look at Italy, look at France, look at Denmark, countries with strict COVID passport rules, all have seen their retail and recreation sectors fare far better than here in the UK. There's been consistency and confidence on this. And with passes and lateral flow tests, venues can operate at 100% capacity. Punters can be confident that they're safe to attend and enjoy themselves. At this time of year, the show goes on and everyone stays in a job. Without these measures, just in a moment, without these measures, with rising infections, with more hospitalisations, we would risk seeing the government forced to impose more draconian measures on these sectors, shutting down our cultural sector, collapsing the economy once again. And I think we should be confident about this. And let me also just address this tension, and it's a reasonable question about the message to work from home if you can, but go out. I sort of make no apology, actually, for trying to safeguard social interactions at this time of year, to trying to safeguard interactions between people, their families and their friends at Christmas time, but also make no apology whatsoever for supporting our hospitality industry, which has been battered by the pandemic and which enjoys our support, our confident support, our full-throated support and our support at the table, at the bar in the coming days.
Can we take it from that, Madam Deputy Speaker, that he's in favour of extending the certification or vaccine passport to all venues?
Well, for now, we think the government has struck the right balance. This is limited to nightclubs and to larger venues. But as the Secretary of State knows, we listen to the Chief Medical Officer, we listen to the Chief Scientific Advisor, we listen to SAGE, we listen to the NHS, and we make decisions based on evidence. And if ever the government wants to come forward with further proposals, we will consider them. We will consider them in a genuinely bipartisan way, and we will act in what we believe to be the national interest. And I don't think anyone would expect less of us. I'll certainly give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Would he recognise that actually, with the COVID passes, given that there's an option of a lateral flow test or a double vaccination, actually the double vaccination that many people will use gives a very false sense of security, because we know that you can be vaccinated and still transmit. Most of the people we know getting COVID at the moment have already been vaccinated. So it's not actually very effective and will give a real false sense of security.
I also think the honourable member should look at the evidence from our friends on the continent, which is that not only does this approach work in terms of giving people confidence to go out and enjoy themselves, it also does encourage people to take up vaccination. And on that basis, I think the Liberal Democrats ought to reconsider their position. I'll give way one more time, and I've got to make progress.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. He's obviously spoken to lots of people and he's really concerned about transmission. Could he tell the House the Labour Party's view on by how much transmission is reduced by 2 vaccinations?
I'm grateful for the honourable member's intervention. I directed to the SAGE advice on this, which is there is some evidence, I wouldn't put it any stronger than that, there is some evidence on reduction of transmission. But as I say, our primary reason for supporting this measure is about giving people confidence to continue accessing hospitality and to give people an added incentive to take up vaccination as well. And on both of those tests, I think our friends on the continent have shown us a better way forward, an effective way forward, and I would dare members opposite to suggest that France, for example, is not a country that values liberty very strongly when you look at their history and their culture. Anyway, moving on, Madam Deputy Speaker, I must make progress. For these passes to work, people must be able to access tests easily and readily. We cannot continue in this situation where tests are out of stock and unavailable to the public who are required to take them, not if COVID passes are to work, and not if people who are close contact of a COVID case are to be able to take the daily tests required. The government's website showed PCR tests unavailable throughout England this morning. The only region where lateral flow tests are available today is in the South East. Those sorts of technical issues and those practical issues of test delivery need to be resolved immediately. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, the measure on daily testing is the one measure that seems to have united the House in agreement, so the Secretary of State really needs to get a grip on this and ensures we have access to the tests we need. Moving on to the flexibility to work from home. Madam Deputy Speaker, we've called for workers to be given the flexibility to work from home for months, and we support the guidance to work from home where possible. I've addressed the contradiction in people working from home and going out to Christmas parties, and we want to protect people's ability to enjoy Christmas safely this year, which I think is one of the key arguments for this measure. And by limiting the interactions people have at work without disrupting their ability to do their work, we thereby lower contact, lower infections, and we hope to preserve their ability to go ahead with the social interactions they cherish most at this time of year. On to mandatory vaccination, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since the Prime Minister rather clumsily and unhelpfully tried to open a, quote, national conversation on mandatory vaccinations for the country at large last week, I want to make it crystal clear that we do not support mandatory vaccinations in general, and I welcome what the Secretary of State has said this afternoon, not the first time he's had to clean up the Prime Minister's mess. We believe the vaccine is safe and effective and that everyone should choose to have it. And I can't give any stronger endorsement than to say that I've had my first 2 jabs and I'll be having my booster on Thursday. And I wouldn't take it myself or recommend it to others unless I believed it was safe. On mandatory vaccinations for NHS staff, I recognise that this is a difficult issue for colleagues across the House and in our NHS. But the NHS has asked us for this, patients want this, and we are persuaded that the threat of Omicron makes it even more important for staff to be vaccinated to protect themselves and to protect the public they serve. I certainly give way.
Thank the honourable member for giving way and draw the House's attention to my declaration of members' interest as a practising NHS doctor. I'd like to commend the honourable member for the consensual way that he's approaching the debate today and for many of the points that he's made, of which I agree. On the point of mandatory vaccinations for NHS staff, before I could train in medicine, I had to have a BCG, a TB injection. I had to also have a hepatitis injection, or I couldn't have practiced medicine because it was about protecting my patients. And I believe it's the duty of all healthcare professionals to put their patients first. And that's why it's absolutely right that healthcare professionals should have mandatory COVID vaccinations. Would he not agree with that point?
I strongly endorse what he has said. And look, infection control is going to be a real challenge this winter because of the nature of the Omicron variant. Ensuring that the NHS workforce is fully vaccinated protects patients and it protects staff who put themselves in harm's way enough already. And as the honourable gentleman who speaks with real knowledge and expertise, this is not a new precedent. NHS staff are already required to inoculate themselves against other diseases. It is indeed a professional duty. And the NHS clearly believes that the April deadline does give sufficient time to persuade the workforce to protect themselves, their patients and their loved ones without seeing an exodus of staff. Certainly give way.
I'm very grateful to the Shadow Secretary of State for giving way, and indeed I supported the requirement for people working with vulnerable people in care homes to be vaccinated, or if they wouldn't be vaccinated, to be removed from direct contact with vulnerable people. Can he tell me if he's aware, because I didn't get a chance to ask the Secretary of State, this proposal for those members of the NHS who have not got vaccinated, is it only affecting frontline staff who interact with the vulnerable, or is it people throughout the NHS who might have no contact with the vulnerable, because that will affect the way I cast my vote today?
Well, I hope I can reassure him in that people, it's not just a case of if you don't take up the jab, that's it, you're out. There is also the opportunity for redeployment to other roles where vaccination would not be mandatory. So I hope that gives him the reassurance that he needs. I'll certainly give way.
I thank my honourable friend give way, and I think he's handling this speech in just the right way. There's a balance of rights here. Patients have a right to be treated by staff who are fully vaccinated to protect them. I had a constituent who was clinically extremely vulnerable who contacted me. She was not willing to go to her needed hospital appointments once she realised that the hospital staff were not fully vaccinated. We have to think of those pretty large number of clinically extremely vulnerable people in this country. Does he agree with us?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and we've heard the arguments in outline, which is it's about protecting staff, it's about protecting patients. This is not a new precedent. There's a professional obligation, which does make this slightly different to the experience in the social care workforce, although I come on to talk about what the government needs to do there. These are the arguments broadly, but I would just ask members on all sides of the House, just let me make this point, and I'll certainly give way. I would just ask members on all sides of the House to think about those NHS staff who go to work every day feeling unsafe because their colleagues are not vaccinated. And if that's not persuasive enough, I would ask them to think about how they would feel if a loved one were treated in a clinical setting or care home by an unvaccinated member of staff through whom they contracted COVID and with it serious illness or worse. If I lost a loved one to serious illness in those circumstances, I'm not sure I would be very forgiving about the decisions made by members of this House.
The point the honourable gentleman is making, but that's not what the results of the survey found when conducting it with NHS staff. A healthcare and social care workforce found that 55% of people in the NHS were against this. So how does he respond to that?
I've no doubt whatsoever, and I don't dispute that opinion in the workforce is divided. Opinion in the workforce is divided, and it's partly divided because people resent the mandate. But just a moment. Ultimately, it really does come down to this, and not just in terms of the broad arguments I made, or indeed the specific cases we might be confronted with without this protection. At what point do we as a House think it's acceptable for people working in health and social care who have a duty of care to their patients to say, I am making a choice to put them at greater risk? I am working against the very principles that encourage me to sign up to my vocation in the first place. And that's why ultimately, I think on balance, this is the right measure. But I will certainly come back shortly to the way in which we need to take the workforce with us and what we need to do ahead of April.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and he really is setting out with great care his very careful response to all of these proposals. But on this vexed issue of mandatory vaccinations, will you accept from me that in my own trust, 97% of the staff have been properly vaccinated. Of the 3%, there's a significant proportion of those who are new starters making their journey towards proper vaccination. So it isn't that clear. And of course, we do have responses from the BMA, Unison, RCN, Unite, the CSP, GMB, RCM and Royal College of GPs, who are actually opposed to making this mandatory and prefer persuasion to coercion. Does he not think that we should be adopting that approach?
Well, that is a very helpful intervention from my honourable friend, and let me be very clear. I absolutely acknowledge the views that have been put forward by the Royal Colleges and by staff trade unions. Government ought to take them seriously and ought to work heavily with them in this next phase, where there is still a window of time for persuasion. And I also point the government to the success that the Welsh Government, the Welsh Labour Government, has had in persuading the workforce. I think there's much to learn, there's time available, and we've got to work in a spirit of partnership. And I'll say more about that in just a moment, because the honourable gentleman at the back has been very patient.
I'm very grateful to the Shadow Secretary of State, and can I endorse and welcome what he said at the start of his speech with regards to comments about the Nazis. I called that out yesterday, and he was right to do so at the dispatch box. But I was looking through my inbox, at going back to the start of the pandemic and lockdown, and virtually every single person working in the care sector or the NHS in my constituency was perfectly legitimately saying, when the vaccine is available, we must be at the front of the queue, because we are dealing with the vulnerable. It is our duty to get vaccinated. I don't think that has changed, and I think he's absolutely right, as is the Secretary of State, for those who are caring for those who are most vulnerable in society, to try and reduce the risk that they face, they should be vaccinated.
I agree with the honourable gentleman, and look, we've got a big effort to boost the booster this month. I think we've got to boost the workforce as well, and make sure that people are supported. Certainly will. This is a difficult decision, two members from the same region, but the honourable member right in the corner has been very patient, and then I'll come to my right honourable friend.
I really appreciate my honourable friend for giving way, and he's making an excellent speech. But the BMA have identified some serious concerns in terms of mandatory vaccines. The fact that we have a chronically understaffed NHS, and do you believe, or does my honourable friend believe, that this is likely to have a significant impact and more harm than good going forward?
I think that's such an important point. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for making that intervention. I think there's a reassurance I'd like to offer her, and then there's a call to action I would like to issue to the government. The reassurance is there were concerns about what would happen to the social care workforce, and that very much influenced Labour's position on that statutory instrument at the time, but we did not see a collapse in the social care workforce numbers that were warned, and there was lots of evidence that it had a positive impact on take-up. Let me just finish this. Let me just finish this point. But I do also want to say to the Secretary of State and his team, if they are asking the health and social care workforce to do their duty as professionals, the government must show greater respect to their professional voice and experience on pay, on conditions, on workload. It is often said that the NHS runs on goodwill, so I would like to see the government showing greater goodwill in return, and to engage with the Royal Colleges and staff trade unions, not just on the plan for vaccine rollout to their members, but on the debate about the future of our health and social care systems and the big workforce challenge. On vaccination, there is still precious time to do the work on persuasion. And having met with the trade unions in recent days, I had a great meeting with Unison yesterday, which I should also declare, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm a member of Unison. Unison had some really helpful advice and practical feedback about the kind of conversations with occupational health that are making a really big impact in giving staff the confidence to choose to take the vaccine well ahead from the deadline. And of course, we would much rather persuasion than compulsion. I'll give way to my honourable friend and then I'll come back.
Thank you to the Secretary of State for giving way. In St Helens, we have 99% of the care home staff vaccinated. In Wiston Hospital, best hospital in the country, we have 91% first vaccine, 89% second vaccine, and 64% with the booster. This has all been done with persuasion, not with the threat of the sack. These people are in a vocation. It isn't just a job to them. They believe in the patients. We must not get to that stage where we're threatening people. It's been care. The GPs have even been involved in persuading the care home staff. Everyone has been involved for some considerable time, and that's the way to do it.
Order. Let me just make this clear. There are over 40 people who want to speak this afternoon. And if people make interventions, it's simply not fair on those who are at the end of the list, who will be trying to speak later on. The Honourable Lady is only one of many. The Shadow Secretary of State is being very fair, as was the Secretary of State, in answering all the questions, but I must ask people to be reasonable. West Streeting.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It may have been a speech rather than an intervention, but I thought it was a very good one, and I welcome what my honourable friend has said, and I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Will he acknowledge that there is vicious and very effective psychological propaganda that anti-vaxxers are using to upset and worry people who may be vaccine hesitant, particularly about issues with fertility and whether the vaccine is halal and all of those things? Does he agree with me the government should do much more to counter this very vicious and damaging propaganda?
I wholeheartedly agree with my right honourable friend, and this comes back to the point I made about the government engaging with staff trade unions and the Royal Colleges. Whatever their policy position on having mandatory vaccination, he will find in them willing allies who want to help the government to persuade colleagues to engage with them and to deal with some of these dangerous conspiracy theories which are knocking public confidence and creating real fear and anxiety entirely without basis. And so I really hope that on this point, when the government concludes later on, they will set out how they plan to engage and will give an undertaking to work with the staff trade unions and with the Royal Colleges, because I think that would do so much to achieve the objectives we all share, but also to raise morale in the workforce, who often feel that they are slogging their guts out for the government but don't get the hearing that they deserve. I'll give way to this honourable gentleman. I'll come back to my honourable friend.
Thank you for giving way. He's making a very good speech, and I apologise for interrupting him. But on a point of science, will he just accept that he's got it a little bit wrong? Having the vaccine doesn't stop you spreading it. It just makes it much less likely that it's going to harm you very badly. So you can have the vaccine and you can still spread it. And to imply otherwise is just wrong.
Can I just say to the honourable gentleman who has called repeatedly from a sedentary position that I don't know the science, that I said nothing of any sort to contradict the points he has just made. And with respect to members opposite, and particularly people who oppose these measures, I think the thing that they're missing is that what is indisputable is that the booster does provide greater protection than the first and second jab, that vaccination, full stop, provides better protection, and that if we're talking about NHS pressures and workforce pressures, the biggest danger is that the virus sweeps through the health and social care workforce, knocks a load of people out in the middle of the busiest period for the NHS, and then the system topples over. I don't know why it has to be explained again and again and again to members opposite that the objective here is to protect the NHS and to stop it from toppling over at a critical time. So these points about the severity of the virus or the efficacy of the vaccine in preventing transmission or serious illness are largely secondary questions, because we know the virus is spreading, we know it is spreading rapidly, and we know that if it rips through the health and social care workforce, that is the biggest risk to the NHS. That is what is going to topple it over, and their constituents will not thank them one bit if they allow that to happen.
Grateful to my honourable friend. He is making an excellent speech and putting his case very forcefully. It's this issue versus coercion versus persuasion, and involving trade unions and the Royal Colleges in taking staff with NHS managers. What wasn't respected by the Secretary of State when he was asked about redundancies earlier on is that this is a retrospective change in people's terms and conditions. And even people who are vaccinated will be resistant to the change being imposed upon them. So we have to go forwards carefully and take staff with us. So would he urge upon the government that they should work with the Royal Colleges and trade unions to take this forward?
But my honourable friend makes such an important point, and I think that's why, going back to the staff surveys, it's not that staff, particularly given that the overwhelming majority of staff are vaccinated, it's not that they don't want their colleagues not to be vaccinated, is that they do have concerns about the way in which the government's going about this. Now, we accepted from the government and from NHS England a very clear view that Omicron has raised the stakes in this regard, and that has had a big bearing on our position. And it was very difficult for me, very difficult for my colleagues on these benches to put ourselves in a position where we're on the other side of the argument from the NHS and from the public. But that doesn't mean that this point about engagement isn't really important, and the government has got to work with the workforce to take them with them, because they really are. You know, it's not good enough for us to just clap for the NHS or clap for carers. We have to work in partnership with them and respect that these are people who have given their lives to public service and caring for others. They do care. They will instinctively be on the right side, but they just need some persuasion, some patience and genuine engagement, and that's why I think the government's gone slightly wrong.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend who started off his speech in an excellent way and has got better as he's gone through it. I say that, and I will almost certainly not be in the same lobby as him on some of the votes this evening. But there is a general point to the specific point he is making on vaccines. And that is, I think, that the government should be as clear and explicit and transparent on every issue that they make. If they not just want people who are worried about vaccines, but worried about this affair, if they want to take them with us. But repeatedly, the government has refused to do a cost-benefit analysis on the impact of their policies, and we've got before us now a number of SIs without impact assessments. Does he agree with me that that information should be available?
Say to my honourable friend that in his intervention he started off well, dipped in the middle and then got better at the end, and I think he made some absolutely fair points about impact assessments and transparency. In fact, I can see the Vaccines Minister waiving impact assessments, so I'm sure she'll make them available to my honourable friend. And it does come back to this point, and it's come up at various points today and previously when we've discussed these sorts of restrictions and measures, and it's how I began my contribution, and it's how I'll begin to close. We really can't be complacent when it comes to public support, public compliance, public consent for the measures that we are considering, because we know that we've asked so much of the British people and they have done their part. We also know that recent events have dented their trust and confidence and their willingness to comply, because they've seen Number 10 doing one thing and doing another, which makes it even more important that when we discuss measures that impact on people's lives, livelihoods and liberties, that we are having these sorts of exchanges, we are rigorously looking over the evidence, we are testing each other's assumptions, and we are coming to a conclusion. And I think with some of the exchanges we've already heard today, that people across the country on both sides of these arguments can at least take some reassurance from the fact that when these matters are under consideration, we do take them seriously. And I think the government could do a little better sometimes on bringing measures forward in advance of their implementation and setting out the rationale and an argument, and not just assuming that because measures have been supported by the public before, they're supported today. I think we have got public support for the measures under consideration this afternoon, but I don't think we should be complacent about it, and that's why I think it's right we're spending so much time exploring these issues. I'll take one or two more interventions and then I'll conclude.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He's making a very important point that we need to make decisions on the evidence that's available. Does he agree with me that having the debate today and passing these measures tonight is urgent? We've heard as well that the doubling rate of Omicron is actually shortening. And if we are to protect the public, our families and our communities in the run-up to Christmas and beyond, and our NHS, these measures need to pass today.
I agree with my honourable friend, and particularly in this city. And the reproduction rate of this virus is shortening every day. And the numbers the Secretary of State set out in his opening remarks, I think, should concentrate minds before people walk through the division lobbies this afternoon. Fun though it might be to see the government in hot water and struggling in votes, it's not in the national interest, and that should be the thing at the forefront of our minds.
Specific point, and I thank him for giving way. Does he agree with me that one of the things that will reassure members across the House is seeing that commitment at the dispatch box from the government that if further restrictions were to come into play, that a vote would be had in this House?
I agree with the honourable member. Look, we can't have spent so much time, and I appreciate she's a newer member of the House, but I dare say she was watching proceedings before she arrived, and we can't have spent so much time in this House talking about parliamentary sovereignty and then throw it out the window in the next Parliament. So I think that is a point well made. Myself and the Shadow Public Health Minister, we've already agreed. He's bringing the dinner. I'm bringing the pudding, and we'll see if the Commons shop is doing crackers on discount if we're meeting over Christmas. But look, finally and seriously, Madam Deputy Speaker, we think there are areas where the government can and should go further without impacting on people's lives, livelihoods and liberties. On ventilation in schools, we know that young people have borne the brunt of this pandemic, and we owe it to them, to their education and to the staff who support them to make sure that their schools are properly ventilated. They can't wait until October next year for a review to be published. We need action now. I wonder if the Secretary of State or the Minister for Cabinet Office in winding up could say something about that. And on jabs for young people, the Christmas holidays seem to us to be an ideal time to get young people vaccinated. So when does the government think we can see action on this front? And finally, on statutory sick pay, as we've already heard very powerfully from my honourable friends, we know that there are people out there who are forced to choose between doing the right thing by their families and doing the right thing by public health because they simply cannot afford to isolate at home. So we implore the government to act by making sure that higher statutory sick pay is available to people immediately so that they can afford to do the right thing. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have not played games with these votes. We are not exploiting the divisions in the Conservative Party to inflict defeat on the government for the sake of scoring political points. The threat facing the country is too serious, and Labour takes our duty to the country seriously. The Tories may be in disarray, but the public can rely on Labour to keep the country safe, to do the right thing, to support these measures today, and we trust the British people to do the same.
Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think the House will want to acknowledge the power of the speech that the opposition spokesman has just given. We wish his predecessor well, and the one thing we can say about the honourable gentleman is his voice carries very well around this chamber. I think the government is right to ask for support for these regulations. I'm glad that the opposition will in general be supporting them, and I will as well. If the public health risk increases, we have to ask what kind of changes to the regulations are proportionate and appropriate. And it may have gone past some of those who've written to me about it, that some of the regulations are actually relaxations, others are not. They are trying to make sure that some places can stay open if people abide by sensible precautions. One of my constituents who's written to me today says that he and his family and many of his friends will not go to places of public congregation because too many people are not vaccinated or showing that they are not infected by the virus. That may be a minority view expressed, but I think actually it's one that was held in the hearts and the minds of very many of our constituents. For those who said that impact assessment's not been made, it has. It's been published. Those who invigilate assessments don't think it's adequate, but that's a side point. In Annex B, on pages 54 and 55, it shows the proportion of people by age in the National Health Service who have been vaccinated. I think we have to recognise that one of the reasons why half of them are under the age of 40 is that the opportunity of vaccination came later for them than it did for those who are older. But I would say to them, if they don't think it matters to them, it does, for the reasons that our honourable friend, the practising doctor, gave, that if you are caring for people who are vulnerable, and obviously people in needing medical care are vulnerable, in the same way in social care they are, the most that we can do to protect ourselves is also having the impact of protecting them. So if in doubt, get the protection that the vaccine and the booster gives. I was going to make a rather longer speech, but I'm actually going to stop now because I think many people want to contribute, many of whom will disagree with me. I will respect what they have to say, but I will say very clearly, I back the government in these regulations.
Graham Stringer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As you know, I was trying to help you with the intervention by withdrawing from the list, but I'm grateful to be the top of it on this side. I agree with my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, when he says that the Prime Minister is a threat to public health. Absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. I draw a different conclusion from my friends on the front bench to this as how we should respond to this. Not by being irresponsible, but by taking a look at the way the government has dealt with the whole of the COVID crisis from the very beginning and are still continuing to do it. As a member of the Science and Technology Committee, together with the Health Committee, we produced a 150-page long report, which I hope honourable and right honourable members have had the time to read, because you may not agree with the conclusions, but it has very valuable information in it. I think the key point in it, which a lot of the press missed, was that not that the government followed the science on this issue, but that they got into a groupthink with the scientific advisors and actually didn't challenge them. They assumed that science was something that handed down tablets of stone, whereas it is not. It is a process, and it needs challenging, both by those of us who have responsibility in this House for making laws and policies, as well as being challenged by other scientists. And we seem to be repeating that process again. Along with a number of honourable members, we had as a witness Susan Hopkins this morning. And as an advisor, let me say at the best, if I can use a word that somebody else used, the advice we were getting was opaque. The information we were getting was opaque when it should be transparent. This time last week, the Deputy Prime Minister stood up and said there is no plan to go to Plan B. We're not going to Plan B. 36 hours later, we were starting Plan B. Why was that? What was the scientific advice given? We were told fairly definitively that there was no such advice given that changed the view. What changed the view was that the Prime Minister was in a state of crisis and under pressure from his own backbenchers and everybody else. That is not a sensible way to make decisions. It is not a sensible way to make decisions to put forward statutory instruments that say on them, and the Minister was waving a sheet about, which may or may not be the impact assessment, but the statutory instruments themselves say there is no impact assessment that has been done. One of the other issues that has happened during this process is that I give way to the honourable member.
I just have got in my hand the impact assessment for vaccination as a condition of deployment in health and care providers. I wasn't able to get in earlier, but I feel confident that the front benches will know that the estimate is that 88,000 people will leave the health sector, 73,000 from the NHS, 15,000 from the independent health sector, and 35,000 workers in domiciliary care. Does he agree with me that that enough is a reason to vote against imposing this on the nation?
Very, very well said.
It's very interesting that. It's also interesting that the papers that were circulated that I got from the Votes Office said there was not an impact assessment, and that doesn't impress me. The point I was just about to make, and I don't know if other honourable and right honourable members have noticed, but there was a 350-page act passed at the start of this epidemic, the COVID Act. It's barely being used. The government could have used the Civil Contingencies Act to bring in some of the items that they've brought in to restrict people's freedoms, maybe necessarily, maybe unnecessarily. The difference between the Civil Contingencies Act and the 1984 Health Act is quite simply that there is less scrutiny in the 84 Health Act. Much less scrutiny is available. Once the acts are passed, if there's not a sunset clause, they last. And I think the government should not be rewarded for unnecessarily using tough authoritarian legislation when other legislation was available which would have allowed more scrutiny. They've refused to give information. And let me say this, and I come back to my honourable friend on the front bench, starting off his speech by saying different people have different views, weigh different factors, civil liberties, health, in different ways. That's absolutely right on this point. But the government will not tell us they will not tell us the cost and benefits of these policies. We now know 750,000 people have failed to be tested for cancer. There's not a win-win situation here. Cancer patients yet to be tested will eventually die because of the decisions taken here, because services aren't available. Some people will die of COVID. In order to come to the right decisions, this House needs to have all the information available. That isn't coming from the NHS and it isn't coming from government ministers. That is why I will not give the Prime Minister the benefit of my support for the way he has arranged to respond to this COVID crisis.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Mr. Speaker, in a typical winter's day, between 200 people and 350 people will die of flu. Do we hide behind our masks? Do we lurk at home working from home? Do we demand that people provide their bona fides before going to a venue? Do we require people to be vaccinated as a condition of keeping their jobs? The question is whether the measures before us today are proportionate actually comes down to a matter of opinion. Do you take seriously some of the extraordinary extrapolations that we've been given, particularly given the record of before? The fact that these are things that might take place, and we have to balance that against the known costs and damage to enterprise, economy and society. And in the end, it comes down to a matter of opinion, a matter of our prejudice. And we are typically capable of organising our lives and making those decisions for ourselves. We decide what our risk appetite is and what we're prepared to encounter and what we're prepared to not. Notwithstanding the carnage on our roads, certainly killing more people than COVID at the moment, some of us still decide to drive. It's a matter of opinion. So it comes down to letting loose the dogs of war. Get the fear factor into it. Get the members of the officials, the members of SAGE, the members of Independent SAGE, of SPI-M, all those, of course, speaking in their own private capacity. Get them out there twisting the fear lever. What about the Health Protection Agency? What Stalinist minds thought up that nomenclature? Get them out there twisting the fear button, and by and large, you will get the reaction that you want. People will crave more enforcement and more fiercer measures to protect them from this great danger that is out there. And let hospitality be just collateral damage. Let them endure the deluge of cancellations now affecting that industry in what should be its most productive time. That's the situation that we have delivered. The government, having administered this ministry of fear, is absolutely complicit with its officials and its organisations that have designed it and delivered it. They have abandoned in doing that any principle of social democracy, of liberal democracy, absolutely beyond anything that we've endured in recent living memory in the history of this pandemic. And as a consequence, having abandoned what might have been their ideology, they are rudderless. And as a consequence of that, so much more at risk of the opinions and predictions of the advisers to which they are in hoc.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I've just come from a meeting of the all-party group on coronavirus, and we were given a shocking set of presentations. I know my honourable member, the member for West Oxfordshire and Abingdon, will say some more about this shortly, but I wanted to bring three key messages from that meeting of scientists and NHS professionals. The first is that the NHS is beyond full stretch already right now. Some said it was at breaking point, and they pointed out that we are not in South Africa, where they started their Omicron wave at a very, very low level. We are starting it on top of a rising number of Delta cases, and that means we have to get transmission levels down now. The focus on vaccination alone, while vaccination is vital, will not be enough. It means that we have to focus on a range of other measures, like ventilations in schools, as others have referenced, but also the big issue of limiting social contact. We need to be honest, and we need to have consistent and clear messaging about the need to reduce that social contact. There is a direct relationship between the number of contacts that we have and the spread of infection. So guidance to work from home, yet still giving the green light to Christmas parties, is, as the Professor of Primary Care in Oxford suggests, akin to advice to wash your hands after a meal, but not after you're going to the toilet. All of us are dreading the prospect of not seeing loved ones again at Christmas. But that is exactly the direction in which we are headed unless the government shows some leadership and tells us the unwelcome truth we might not like to hear. I give way.
The Honourable Lady, because she and I share a hospital trust, but she will know that that hospital is not being overwhelmed at the moment by COVID cases and the pressures of COVID. That hospital is being overwhelmed by cases of non-COVID illnesses which have been neglected during lockdown, and by the failure to be able to release people who are medically fit for discharge. Those are the real pressures on the health service at the moment, not a torrent of COVID cases coming into them as it stands. Isn't that correct?
That may well be the case right now, but I don't see why that is an argument about saying that we need to get coronavirus cases down. If transmission rates go on the trajectory that we are being told that they will, then we can be absolutely sure that the pressure on our hospitals and on our NHS Trust is going to be massive. So I don't disagree with the point that he's made, but I don't see that it's a criticism of the argument that I'm advancing. It is precisely because of the multiple pressures on our hospital system that we need to get the transmission rates of Omicron down, and indeed Delta down. That is why I want to see the government get rid of the disincentives that are currently built into the system that stop people from being able to self-isolate when they need to. Why do we still not have that better sick pay for self-isolation? Why do we not have the better support for our businesses? Because we know that if there's going to be reduced social contact, as there needs to be, that has an impact particularly on the hospitality sector. So what we need to see is, for example, the VAT reductions being extended beyond April, where it's due to end. We need businesses to be offered grants to help them through these next difficult weeks, as well as the flexibility on paying back COVID loans. My constituency in Brighton Pavilion is already feeling the impacts of Omicron, and the hospitality sector there is extremely worried. So why can't we not tell them, for example, that there will be extended and expanded business relief, with the government ensuring that local councils don't lose even more funding, indeed, as well as a proper scheme of support for the self-employed, who, as we know, play such a key part in our economy and yet have been utterly left out from previous support mechanisms. Now, turning to the statutory instruments before us today, I very much regret that the government has given MPs less than 24 hours to analyse these SIs, and frankly, they have not advanced the scientific case. A Public Administration Committee inquiry earlier in the year concluded that the government hasn't made a robust case for vaccine passports, and I haven't heard anything today that has persuaded me otherwise. And whilst I recognise the civil liberty arguments on these measures, and I have sympathy for them, my bigger concern is through the strong body of evidence about the impact of vaccination passports on vaccination rates. Because this makes clear that whilst amongst those inclined towards vaccination, vaccine passes can accelerate the take-up rates, they also entrench opposition amongst those who are hesitant. As Professor Stephen Reicher has said, people not getting vaccinated isn't some kind of cognitive problem. It isn't that they don't understand the issues. It's a social problem. People aren't getting vaccinated because of a lack of trust. And trying to force them into it, either with vaccine passports or mandatory vaccination in some settings, compounds that mistrust, as does berating them or othering them. If we want more people to be vaccinated, and believe me, I absolutely want more people to be vaccinated, that is the bottom line, of course we do. But we have to build the sense that vaccination is being done for the community, not done to it. It is for the common good. Behavioural science clearly indicates that coercion undermines the relationships that we need to build and the respect that we must show one another in order to increase vaccination rates. And we do everyone a massive disservice by ignoring that science. Finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I just want to say a word about the wider global situation we face. It is supremely reckless to have so catastrophically neglected vaccination in poorer countries, and is extremely reckless of our government to be refusing to support the TRIPS waiver at the World Trade Organization. As Winnie Bayamina, the Executive Director of UN AIDS, has said, Omicron is with us because we have failed to vaccinate the world. The government should be absolutely changing its position when it comes to that TRIPS waiver. It should not be blocking it. This virus is one that will be with us for years and years to come, and it will mutate into other viruses and variants unless we treat this as a global crisis, not just a crisis here at home. So I beg them to look at the evidence, look at what works, and move forward on that basis.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. May I begin just by saying a word about the vaccine programme and make a plea to ministers. It's very important that with the emergence of Omicron we don't accidentally underplay the success of the vaccine programme to date. We know that the vaccines will produce a number of immune responses, the production of neutralising antibodies, the production of marker antibodies and a T-cell response, and although